I found out about the fake charges while I was eating a late-night sandwich and scanning through my bank app. My HOA dues were always the same $220, paid quarterly. But this time, $480. I almost choked on my turkey and mustard. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburb outside of Phoenix. Well, it used to be quiet until Whitney Granger got elected president of the HOA. Mid-50s, bob haircut sharp enough to slice drywall, and a voice like a smoke alarm. Whitney had a talent for pretending she was doing things for the good of the neighborhood while really just swinging her weight around like she owned the block. I'm Vincent Larkin, by the way. I'm a commercial electrician. I work hard, keep my lawn trimmed, don't bother anyone. But apparently that wasn't enough for Whitney. After her husband left her and she got full control of the HOA board, she ran it like a petty dictatorship. When I saw the padded charge, I figured it must be a clerical error. I emailed the HOA office. No reply. I left a voicemail. Nothing. So I showed up at the office in person. It was just a little room attached to the clubhouse where Whitney held her monthly meetings, complete with donuts she never paid for. She was behind the desk when I walked in. "Oh, Vincent," she said, pretending to be surprised. "You're not on the appointment schedule." "I don't need an appointment to ask why you overcharged me by $260. Her lips twitched. "That's not an overcharge. Your account was adjusted for violations." I crossed my arms. "What violations?" "Let's see." She flipped through a folder way too quickly. "Ah, yes. Improper placement of trash bins. Failure to edge lawn properly. Unauthorized garden ornament. Non-compliant mailbox paint." I blinked. "Are you serious? My bins were out for less than a day. And what the hell even is non-compliant mailbox paint?" She shrugged. "Regulations are regulations. You just made this stuff up." She smiled, the kind of smile you give a dog before taking its bone. "If you feel the charges are in error, you can appeal at the next board meeting. Next month." I left before I said something that'd get me arrested. But I wasn't letting this drop. I went home and pulled out every HOA rulebook and email I had. There was nothing in the rules about mailbox paint or lawn edging techniques. The garden ornament? A metal sun decoration my daughter gave me for Father's Day. It wasn't even in the yard, it was on my porch. I started digging. And what I found? Whitney had been slipping adjustments into the accounts of at least half a dozen neighbors. Weird little charges, all with vague violation names. I knocked on doors. I asked questions. Turns out I wasn't the only one. My neighbor Roy got charged for unauthorized driveway texture. Marcy, 3 houses down, got fined $200 for having excessively vibrant seasonal decor. I started documenting everything. Screenshots, bank statements, copies of the HOA newsletters, photos of the supposed violations. Then I got lucky. A guy named Tom, who used to be on the board before Whitney pushed him out, handed me a flash drive. "She's been padding the HOA books," he said. "She hides it in miscellaneous violations and moves the money into a separate account listed under Community Improvement Trust. But that account doesn't exist in the HOA charter." I took the flash drive home and opened the files. They were spreadsheets, dozens of them. And there it was, line after line of fake fines, all with vague descriptions, all going into the same phantom account. Whitney wasn't just being petty. She was committing fraud. The next morning, I took the day off work. I told my foreman it was a personal legal matter, and that was all it took for him to give me the nod. He used to deal with a condo board in Mesa, so he knew the drill. I drove straight to the Maricopa County Recorder's office. I needed to confirm whether the Community Improvement Trust account had ever been registered as part of our HOA's charter. I waited an hour behind a guy arguing over a fence dispute, but when I finally got to the counter and showed the clerk our HOA's association name, she pulled up the public filings. "Only 2 accounts listed," she said, tapping her screen. "General operating and reserve maintenance. No third trust account?" She shook her head. "If it exists, it's not officially recorded. That would be a problem." I took a photo of the screen with my phone and thanked her. By noon, I was sitting in front of an old friend from high school, Marcus Delgado, now a licensed civil attorney with a reputation for chewing through HOA boards like termites through redwood. He glanced through the files on my flash drive, eyes narrowing as he paged through the spreadsheets. "She's reallocating funds into a ghost account without board approval or resident notice," he said, tapping the screen, "and using phony violations to justify it. This isn't just a violation of your CC and RS, this is criminal misappropriation. Could we go after her?" "That depends," he said. "Do you want to make noise? Or do you want results?" "Both." He leaned back. "Then we file for a forensic audit first. That'll freeze the HOA's financial activity until a court-appointed auditor goes through the books. If she's been siphoning money, it'll show. Will that stop her from issuing more charges in the meantime?" "Temporarily, yeah. But if she tries to override the freeze, she opens herself to contempt." I nodded. "Let's do it." Marcus filed the injunction that afternoon. By Friday, the court ordered a full audit and notified the HOA board. That's when things got interesting. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice duct-taped to my garage. "Urgent violation. Unauthorized surveillance equipment." I stood there staring at it, half laughing. The only camera I had was a Ring doorbell, the same one pretty much everyone on our street had. I pulled it down, bagged it, and drove straight to the precinct. Inside, I met with Detective Carla Mendez, who handled financial crimes. Marcus had already forwarded her a copy of the forensic audit filing and the flash drive. "You're saying she fabricated violations, redirected funds, and then retaliated when you challenged it?" she asked while reviewing the files. "Exactly. And I'm not the only one she's targeted." Mendez nodded slowly. "If any of this checks out, she's facing felony charges. Fraud, embezzlement, and possibly racketeering depending on how far it goes. She instructed an officer to open an investigation and requested my original copy of the HOA handbook." I handed it over along with a notarized statement about the fake charges. By the following week, things had started to unravel for Whitney Granger. The court-appointed auditor, a meticulous man named Harold Brooks, showed up at the HOA office with 2 assistants and a stack of binders. His presence alone sent the board members scrambling. Whitney tried to claim she was unavailable due to a family emergency, but the court order required her attendance under threat of arrest. That night, a group of neighbors gathered in my garage. Roy brought folding chairs, Marcy made coffee, and Tom printed out a timeline of suspicious financial activity going back 2 years. "Check this out," Tom said, pointing to a line item labeled Perimeter Beautification Initiative. "She charged us almost $15,000 for a landscaping project that never happened. Wasn't that the same month she went to that conference in San Diego?" Roy asked, flipping through the HOA newsletter archives. "Yup," Tom replied. "And guess what? The HOA paid for it. She wrote it off as urban planning research." Marcy leaned forward. "And the board just let her?" Tom nodded grimly. "Half of them are her old co-workers from the bank. She stacked the board with cronies after she got elected president. I printed out everything. The travel reimbursements, the non-existent projects, the unexplained charges. By the end of the night, we had a binder thicker than a phone book. The next board meeting was scheduled for that Thursday. Usually, only a handful of residents showed up. This time, the clubhouse was standing room only. Whitney walked in wearing a bright red blazer and a look that tried to project calm but couldn't quite hide the twitch in her left eye. She took her seat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members who avoided eye contact with everyone. "Let's begin with community concerns," she said, voice tight. I stood. "I'd like to ask the board where the funds for the Community Improvement Trust are held, because according to the recorder's office, that account doesn't exist." Murmurs spread through the room. Whitney blinked. "That fund is managed off-site. It's a legacy account from a prior administration." "That's a lie," Tom said, rising next to me. "I was on that board. No such account ever existed. It started under you." Before she could respond, Harold Brooks stepped forward from the back of the room. "I'm the court-appointed auditor," he said, holding up a sealed report. "This is a preliminary summary of our findings. We've identified over $80,000 in unaccounted funds, misclassified expenses, and unauthorized reimbursements." Whitney's face turned pale. Harold continued, "We've also found evidence of personal expenditures disguised as community projects. These include airfare, hotel stays, and high-end dining, all without board approval or resident disclosure." Someone in the back whistled. The room erupted in angry chatter. Whitney stood, her voice cracking. "This is a coordinated attack. Mr. Larkin has been harassing this board for weeks." Detective Mendez stepped into the room, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She held up a warrant. "Whitney Granger, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of HOA funds. Please step forward." Whitney froze, then bolted. She made it halfway to the side exit before one of the officers intercepted her. They cuffed her in front of the entire neighborhood. Roy let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be." Marcy raised her phone and took a photo. "You think this counts as community improvement?" Everyone laughed loud and long. After the meeting, the board voted to suspend all operations until a new interim committee could be elected. Tom volunteered to chair it. I was asked to head the oversight group that would supervise the transition. We accepted. The next morning, the clubhouse mailbox was overflowing with letters from residents demanding refunds, audits, and apologies. Most of them included copies of fines they'd paid. We logged every single one. Marcus filed the civil suit the same week. The charges against Whitney included fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and unjust enrichment. By the end of the month, her assets were frozen pending trial. Her house went up for sale within weeks. She tried to claim she'd been misled by her treasurer, but the emails we found where she explicitly instructed board members to keep the books vague made that defense crumble. What she didn't know was that the Ring doorbell she tried to fine me for had also recorded her slipping envelopes into her car during late-night visits to the clubhouse. One of them turned out to contain a cashier's check made out to herself. By the time it was over, the neighborhood had changed. Not just the leadership, but the spirit. People started talking again, helping each other, fixing up their homes, not out of fear of fines, but out of pride. And the new mailbox paint rule? We scrapped it. Let people paint them whatever color they wanted. Mine's bright yellow now, just to remind everyone where this all started. 2 weeks after Whitney was arrested, the temporary board held its first working session in the clubhouse. No donuts this time, just spreadsheets, legal pads, and a whole lot of coffee. Tom had already compiled a priority list. Refund affected residents, restore transparency, and reestablish checks and balances. But there was one problem we hadn't anticipated. The HOA's financial software was locked. The password was tied to Whitney's personal credentials, and the vendor claimed they couldn't reset the system without authorization from the account owner. Apparently, Whitney had signed the software license in her name instead of the HOA's. Another power grab. "So she owned our financial system?" I asked, staring at the vendor's email. Tom nodded. "Illegally, yeah. It's like buying a company car and titling it in your cat's name. We brought it to Marcus. He filed an emergency order with the court to compel access. While that was processing, I got a call from Detective Mendez. "We're expanding the investigation," she said, not bothering with small talk. "Turns out your HOA president had a side business." "What kind of business?" "She created a shell company called Civic Enhancements, LLC. It billed the HOA for services that were never rendered: landscaping, signage, holiday lighting. We've confirmed at least 6 invoices totaling over $25,000, all deposited into an account under her name." "You're kidding." "Wish I was." We also found something else: security footage from a storage unit she rented in Glendale. She stored HOA documents offsite. Illegally. We're executing a search warrant tomorrow. I met her at the facility the next morning. The place looked like any other row of beige garages, but inside Unit 407 was a different story. Filing cabinets, bankers' boxes, and a collapsible table covered in loose receipts. Mendez put on gloves and started digging. I helped where I could, mostly sorting papers and snapping photos. And then I found a ledger marked miscellaneous. Reimbursements Q3. Each entry was handwritten. Some had check numbers next to them. One caught my eye. Fence repairs $2,300 paid to C LLC approval. WG got one. I called out. Mendez stepped over, studied the page, then flipped to the matching receipt in a stapled packet. No permit filed. No contractor records. No before and after photos. This work never happened. Who approved it? She pointed at the initials. Whitney Granger. Every single one of these entries is signed off by her. No secondary authorization. That's a violation of your HOA bylaws. I felt my stomach flip. How many of these are there? She pulled out another stack. We've counted 37 so far. Back home that night, I shared the update with Roy and Marcy, who'd become my unofficial war counsel. Roy brought over a box of old newsletters. Thought you might want to see this, he said, pulling out a glossy trifold from last fall. She announced an eco-pathway restoration project behind the tennis courts, claimed it was done with community funds. Did it ever happen? Not unless she restored it with invisible bricks. I added it to the evidence binder. Mendez confirmed later that the invoice for that project matched another deposit into Civic Enhancements LLC. By the end of the month, the county prosecutor filed formal charges. Wire fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and theft by deception. Marcus prepared the civil suit on behalf of all 43 residents who'd been overcharged. The total damages claimed exceeded $112,000. But then something happened that none of us expected. The state licensing board launched an inquiry into the HOA's management firm, the one Whitney originally contracted to consult on community standards. Turns out they'd rubber-stamped all of her violation notices without verifying them. And they'd received a consulting fee of $5,000 every quarter since Whitney took office. The firm denied wrongdoing, but their emails told a different story. One message from their regional manager read, confirming we'll categorize the mailbox colors as non-compliant. MS. Granger wants the fines issued by Friday. That was the nail in the coffin. They lost their license within a week. With the management firm gone, we had to decide whether to bring in a new company or manage the HOA ourselves. Most of us leaned toward self-governance. We held a community vote, and the results were unanimous. We were done with outsiders. As we transitioned, Marcus recommended we register a new nonprofit entity to replace the old HOA structure. The original charter had been twisted beyond recognition, better to start fresh. Tom volunteered to be the interim director, and I agreed to handle compliance and transparency. One afternoon, while sorting through the HOA's old mailroom storage, I found a curious envelope tucked behind a cabinet drawer. It was unsealed, addressed to Whitney, and dated 6 months before her arrest. Inside was a letter from a local contractor, declining a bid for a lighting project. The letter read, "We cannot in good conscience participate in a project that does not exist. No such worksite was found at the described location." The letter had been stamped "Received" by Whitney's office. She knew. She knew the projects were fake and still submitted the invoices. I scanned it immediately and forwarded it to Mendez. It became a key exhibit in the trial. The courtroom was packed on the first day of her hearing. Whitney, dressed in a navy suit 2 sizes too tight, sat between her defense team like a washed-up politician clinging to a podium. Her lawyers tried to argue that the funds had been reallocated for community enhancement, but the judge wasn't having it. "You created a fictitious company, billed your neighbors for work that never occurred, and deposited the funds into a personal account," the judge said plainly. "This community trusted you. You betrayed that trust for personal gain." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years with parole eligibility after 5. Her assets were liquidated: house, car, even the so-called consulting laptop she tried to write off as HOA property. The restitution fund established from her estate paid back nearly 70% of the stolen funds. The rest would come from a civil lien, payable over time. In the months that followed, our neighborhood transformed. We held monthly town halls rotating between driveways. Kids painted murals on the old HOA notice board. We planted a community garden where Whitney once promised a security gazebo that never materialized. One Saturday, I stood outside with Roy watching his grandkids chase each other across his lawn, now decorated with solar lights and a flamingo in a Hawaiian shirt. "You think she ever thought we'd figure it out?" he asked. "No," I said. "That was her mistake." He nodded. Ours was letting her get that far in the first place. We didn't let it happen again. Every document, every vote, every dollar spent posted online, reviewed by 3 committee members, and accessible 24/7. It wasn't just about recovery anymore. It was about setting a new standard. We didn't just take our neighborhood back. We rebuilt it better. The first sign we weren't done yet came in the form of a certified envelope left on my porch, just over a month after the trial ended. The return address was a law firm downtown, one I hadn't dealt with yet. Inside was a formal notice stating that a class action was being filed on behalf of former residents who had sold their homes during Whitney's tenure. According to the suit, inflated fines and unrecorded liens had driven down sale prices, and the losses weren't minor. Some were out over $20,000. I walked the envelope over to Tom's place. He was kneeling in his garage, sorting through folding tables for the upcoming community cleanup event. "She's gone, but her mess keeps bubbling up," I said, handing him the letter. Tom unfolded it and read in silence. When he finished, he nodded once and went to his workbench, pulling out a binder labeled Property Transfers 2021-2023. "I figured something like this would surface," he said. "She started issuing those hidden liens right after the pandemic. Claimed it was to discourage improper listings. She told the buyers? She never told anyone. Some found out at closing. Others didn't notice until escrow flagged the title. I've got copies of 3 flagged sales right here." I scanned the pages. Each showed a line item labeled Pending Compliance Adjustment with no explanation, no signature, and no corresponding violation in the property records. She was cooking the numbers to punish anyone who didn't bend to her. Tom nodded again. "And now we've got people who lost equity over it." That night, I called Marcus and explained the situation. He asked me to bring everything I had to his office the next morning. By the time I arrived, he already had a legal pad half covered in notes. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore," he said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. "If she deliberately interfered with property sales, that's real estate fraud. Could be grounds for felony charges, separate from the financial crimes." I leaned forward in my chair. "Marcus, she's already in prison. What else can we do?" "We go up the ladder," he said. "If anyone else on that board signed off on these transfers or even knew about them, we build a conspiracy case. If they profited, it's racketeering." I left his office and drove straight to the county assessor's office. I requested copies of all property transfers from our neighborhood over the 2-year period. It took 3 days to get the full stack, but what I found made my hands go cold. 7 sales showed post-closing adjustments. In each case, the seller received less than the buyer paid. The difference? Deposited into the HOA's operating account under compliance reconciliation. I called Roy and Marcy. We spread the documents across my dining table, triple-checking the math. Something didn't line up. "Look at this one," Marcy said, tracing a finger across the column. Seller accepted $230,000. Buyer paid $250. 20 grand vanished. And the seller never got a breakdown, I added. It was logged as a flat fee. Roy pulled out his phone. "I know the guy who sold that place. Retired firefighter. Moved to Flagstaff. He told me he had to dip into his pension to cover closing costs." The next morning, I delivered everything to Detective Mendez. She met me in the hallway outside her office, flipping through the files as we walked. "These are forged," she said, stopping at a signature line. "That's not the notary on record for any of these dates." Whitney again? Maybe. But if she had help, we'll find out. Within the week, subpoenas were issued for the remaining 2 board members from Whitney's term. They both stepped down quietly after her arrest, claiming they were misled by her manipulations. But now, with new evidence, that story didn't hold. The first, Elaine Dobbins, folded after one interview. She admitted she'd signed off on adjustments in exchange for waived dues. She said it was about keeping the community's financial image pristine, Elaine confessed. Said if we didn't balance the books, property values would drop. The second, Greg Marsh, denied everything. Claimed his signature had been forged. But handwriting analysis said otherwise. He was arrested 2 days later, charged with aiding and abetting wire fraud and falsifying real estate disclosures. Meanwhile, the buyers and sellers impacted by the rigged sales began submitting sworn statements. Marcus compiled over 20, including one from a widow who'd lost her husband and had to sell fast. Whitney had deducted $15,000 from her sale, citing accumulated landscape violations. "My husband planted those trees himself," the widow wrote. "They were in perfect shape." The prosecutor's office opened a second case. New charges were added to Whitney's record, and the court extended her sentence by another 4 years. Greg Marsh took a plea deal in exchange for testimony, and Elaine, though spared jail time, was barred from holding any position of fiduciary responsibility for the rest of her life. With the last of the rot dug out, we turned to rebuilding fully. We brought in an independent auditor to help us rewrite the HOA's financial policies from the ground up. Every charge now required 3 signatures, an explanatory memo, and a public posting in the community portal. Tom and I built a small booth beside the clubhouse, just a folding table under a canvas tent. We called it the Transparency Stand. Every Saturday, residents could stop by, review the books, ask questions, or just chat about improvements. It became more than an information station. It became a symbol. One afternoon, while I was manning the booth, a young couple approached. They'd just moved in 2 weeks prior. "I heard this place used to have problems," the husband said, hesitating. "Yeah," I replied, "but we fixed them." His wife looked around. Kids were drawing chalk murals on the sidewalk. Someone was grilling a few houses down. The air smelled like mesquite and fresh soil. "Seems like a good place now," she said. "It is," I told her, "because everyone here decided it was worth fighting for." After they left, I sat back in my chair and looked up at the banner overhead. It read, "Accountable, accessible, united." Roy had painted it himself. The funny thing is, we never set out to rebuild a community. We just wanted our rights back. But justice has a way of planting roots when you least expect it. And sometimes all it takes to grow something better is knowing someone tried to poison the soil